Hey everybody, Dr. D here. This video is designed to basically help people that struggle with graphing. They're not that familiar with graphing. So I'm going to jump right in here and share my screen. And we're going to talk a little bit about graphing. So let's pull up Microsoft Excel here. Now, I should tell you that I can only do Microsoft Excel. I mean, I don't use numbers much, and I can't make videos for each one. So if you're using something other than Excel, numbers works very similarly. But you can also go on campus. There are computer labs to get help with stuff if you're using something different. I know Google has some free apps that you can use too for graphing. So I'm going to show you Microsoft Excel. If you're not using that, and then you need to work some stuff out on your own. So I've created just a fake, data set here, X and Y. And one thing I'll tell you right off the bat, always put your X on the left. So when you go to graph it, that's going to tell it effectively that is X. Okay. And obviously I'm just calling this X and Y, but for your very first lab, you'll have temperature and dissolved oxygen. Okay. So X is always the independent variable. The X-axis, and that is always going to be your independent variable. That's the one that you're kind of varying to see what happens to the Y. Okay. So some examples I've given in I think in your first lab, if I want to vary pesticide levels and see how the plants respond, X would be the pesticide level on the X-axis. That's what I'm varying. What I'm measuring is the Y-axis. So always put the X on the left, whatever it is your independent variable. And then you want to select the data that you want to graph. That tells it. And then you want to insert. And every version of Excel and all of that is, this is getting in my way here, this thing is slightly different depending which version you're using. If you're using Excel on Mac, it'll be slightly different, but you can insert, and it immediately will recommend charts. Okay, you don't have to use a recommended one, but here it's showing you that. So what I find a lot of people do, they'll go here to bar charts and they'll choose this, and they'll get this double bar. And this is not really appropriate for this data. All you have is a relationship between X and Y. So what this is doing is it's labeling these like different samples. These would be 9 different samples, and it's showing you your temperature. Well, I'm sure your temperature, your X and your Y. If it was the first lab you were doing, it'd be temperature and dissolved oxygen. It's not really an easy graph to interpret, and it's a little bit more confusing than necessary. So you don't want to do that. If you select this here, it will recommend graphs, and you can see the recommended one is simply what's called a clustered column. Okay, you can see that the X is on the X-axis. That's what you want in this case. And you see it shows a nice trend. And there you have your bar graph, okay? Now, bar graphs, typically, they're used to show changes over time, but they're also used to show, typically groups of data and comparing groups. Since you only have one data point here, 0, 4, 2, 8, those are single data points, bar graph isn't really the best choice. Now, if I was looking at, say, SAT scores, and I was comparing female Asian Americans and male Asian Americans and female Caucasians and male Caucasians and female African Americans and male African Americans, that would be a great bar graph, right? You'd have your particular group on the X-axis and the SAT score on the Y-axis, and the bar graph compares those groups, and the bar is going to be the average of that group. What was the average SAT score? So bar graphs imply that you're comparing groups. And they can also be used to show trends over time. So for instance, you want to look at car accidents by year. That would be ideal for a bar graph. But single data points like this are more suited to scatter or line graphs. And you can see the recommended ones here. Here's the line graphs. Now there's 2 here. This one I don't like because it doesn't show the data points. You're hiding the data points. The person has no idea how big your data set is. This could be 3 data points. So this is not a good choice, in my opinion. The better choice is the one that shows the data points, which is this one. Okay. Now, line graph is certainly appropriate here. You can see there's an obvious trend here. In some cases, you don't want to use a line graph, especially if the data points are a little more skewed, you're not sure of the trend. Because then the line is suggesting that at value 5, we know, hey, this is what it's going to be at value 5 down here on the X. It's going to be this value of Y. If that's not known and there's a little bit more up and down or a little bit more change, you don't want to use a line graph. You want to use a scatter graph, which is this one. And it's not even one of the recommended ones, which I don't care for because they see the trend, so they figure you want to use don't want to use a scatter plot. But here it is right here. That's your scatter plot here. And it's going to put the dots there, but it's not going to connect them. This is my first choice for data like this, because I'm not so sure necessarily what the trend is and what there might be, what's going to happen after 16. If we had more data, maybe it starts to go down. So either of these is acceptable. Sometimes it's preference. You're not going to lose points on a particular lab if you choose a chart that's not my favorite, as long as the chart you choose is appropriate. I do not think a bar graph is appropriate for single data points. Line and scatter are much more appropriate. So once you choose your graph, you then can add the title. It automatically puts the Y as the title, but you can just modify this, call it whatever you want. You want it to be descriptive. For your first lab, it might be, dissolve oxygen as a function of temperature. That would be nice. Now, you see there's no labels for my X and Y axes, but you can add chart elements over here. Axis titles, I need a primary horizontal title, and axis title, I need a primary vertical title. And then you just type what it is you want there. If this was the first lab, it would be temperature. Always include your units. Degrees C for that first lab. Always include your units. Tell the person what the units are. So now you've got your graph nicely done. You can change your scales and everything. By clicking on them over here, you can have your max and min. In one case in our class, you're not going to want to have it go to 0. Because let's say you have a bunch of data points and they're all clustered around, say, the value 8, 8.5, 8.6, 8.2, 8.1. And those are Y values and they're over some X value changing. And you can't really see the change if your scale goes from 0 to 10. Your scale might want to go from 7.5 to 9.5, or from, if your lowest value is 8.1 and your highest value is 8.9, have it go from 8 to 9. You don't need to have your scale start at 0. That'll show you the trend better. And there's an actual case like that in one of the future labs that you'll be graphing. You're not going to want your y-axis at 0. You're not going to be able to see the trend very nicely. Okay, so we've worked out our axes. You can do lots of things here. This is nice to learn, you see. You can also do all sorts of stuff here with, colors and lines. You can change your data point. You don't want to use the marker. You want the marker to be bigger. You want it to be a square. You get more advanced, you'll have multiple data sets on the same graph. You can have them be different colors, all of that. You don't need to worry about that for this class. This is all you need. Axes, being able to change your axes, that's important. Like if you don't want it to start at 0, I want my minimum to start at 1. Okay, in this case, that might not be appropriate, but anyway, it is. The point is still above 1. We're okay. We can do that. You can do whatever we want, and you can change the gap between them, and also the major unit, the minor unit, all of that, as you can see here, it goes by 10 and 2. So you do whatever you want when you need it. But that is the basics of Microsoft Excel. As I said, numbers is very similar. Numbers is very similar. After that, you're on your own. But so if you use if you're on campus, you can use the computer labs. You can get someone to, help you with Excel, or just use Excel there and save it to a flash drive and do it like that. So with that, that's at least an opportunity for you to get familiar with how to do graphing and how to choose different graphs. Okay, so I'm going to stop my screen share here. Oh, here it is. Freaking out here. All right. So that is the basics of graphing, how to choose graphs. If there's a clear trend, a line graph is fine. Bar graphs, typically, if you've got groups of data, if there's not a clear trend, just do it as a scatter plot. Make sure your independent variables on the x-axis, that's the one you're kind of varying in the lab or that's changing. And the other one's what's being measured and kind of what you want to look at, right? So I think that helps you at least with the basics of this class with graphing. With that, I'm going to terminate the video and good luck with your graphing.